Okay, back with another whiteboard video. Today I'm going to talk about yaw performance. I did a webinar last night on this. We looked at some of the key things, and it's a really key time in flocks. So if I was going into flock now, I would create my checklist and areas that we would look at, starting with the KPIs in the farm: body condition score, abortion, lameness, minerals, parasites, vaccines and hormones, iceberg diseases and quarantine. So looking at these areas now with a view to flock performance and improving it. So the first place to start is, where are the KPIs in the farm? Where is the farm from a production point of view? Where do they want to be? And looking at the key things like, is it kilos per hectare you want to look at? The scanning percentage, really important. But then following on to lambing percentage, weaning percentage and sale percentage. And scanning is often for vanity. Lambs sold is what I say is for sanity. So looking at rams purchased and lambs produced from those rams, how are we going to keep them in the system? What are the key things? What are the metrics we're setting out? Where is the farm? Where do we want to go to? And what are these issues? What are the areas, the red areas we need to work on? Just a bit of a background again. I suppose we're out from breeding. We're out around here now in a lot of flocks and getting prepared for breeding. Some of the things about a yaw, we want to maximise those ovulations. She's a seasonal breeder, so she breeds based on the release of melatonin from the pineal gland. And that's really down to a number of factors. It can differ between breeds, but its big influence on that is nutrition. So it's really important to look at that. We can manipulate that using hormones. So understanding just that cycle. So we're out here from breeding, and this idea that she cycles every 17 days. Our rams are introduced here. But what happens every 17 days is we've windows to breed that yaw. So we want to maximize breeding for a tight lambing period. So what we do here in preparation really makes a difference, okay? So I suppose there's lots of factors I'm going to talk about, but if you want to start with nutrition, so nutrition is key. So nutrition will impact the yaw's ability to come into season, to ovulate, and we have this idea of flushing yaws. So we're giving them a higher plane of nutrition as they come into breeding. Body condition score is really important here. So putting our hands on yaws, physically putting our hands on yaws, seeing where body condition score is, and identifying thin yaws. So we want to optimize body condition score between 2.5 to 4, but really in around that 3.5, and then a rising plane of nutrition into breeding time will have a dramatic impact on fertility and yaw performance. So we need to understand where we are, and the only way we can do that is assess body condition score. It takes time to put condition score on yaws. It can take up to 8 weeks on a grass diet. It can take 4 to 6 weeks with more supplementation. So we want to identify, is the flock where it should be at, and what do we need to do then with particularly maybe a thin group of ewes. And that's probably the thing I've made the most impact on flocks around breeding, is getting ram numbers up and actually focus on nutrition. That can be very key. Minerals also play a role around now. Selenium is important for the yaw, important for the ram and sperm production. Iodine is another important one for the yaw. Copper, zinc, all these minerals need to be balanced. We need to see where we are at the farm and assess that. So we can do that now. Look at what supplementation we need to feed yaws. Yaws typically eat about 1 kilo dry matter. What's that quality of that grass like from an energy and protein perspective? Where's body condition score and where we're going to be to breeding? And that allows us to step forward into breeding time with as many yaws cycling and our best chance of high ovulation rates and a good scanning percentage then. Obviously the ram is really important when it comes to breeding. We can introduce teaser rams to help yaws cycle. We can have that ram effect where we have rams near yaws. But when we do introduce rams, the biggest thing is we don't overwork these rams. So the ratios can be 1 to 60 for a mature ram, 1 to 40. But if we're using hormones to manipulate the cycle, and we're using sponges like progesterone sponges, we'll have yaws coming in 24 to 48 hours. Our ratios go right down to 1:10 to 1:12. We can fertility test rams. That's important probably with single sire matings. We're depending on one ram. We really want to make sure that he is firing on all cylinders. So an MOT for your ram, we do that well out in advance of breeding because it takes 6 weeks for sperm production. So if we have anything insult or we have infertility issues, it takes a period of time. And about 1 in 7 to 1 in 8 of rams that I would have fertility tested in the past had fertility issues. So we want to give ourselves every chance. We do that by having, if you want more lambs, you often need more rams. And I know rams come at a cost, but that's key. So we need to check that ram out. Body condition score, fit not fat. We want to make sure that his teeth are okay, checking the brisket for any brisket sores. We want to make sure that his testicles, that we get a good feel of them. They talk about the bicep or that right plum, that they're freely movable. Get down and feel the epididymis. Make sure he's not lame. He gets all his worm or fluke treatments and any vaccines that the rest of the flock are on. That's really, really key. So the time to focus on your rams is right now and have them primed, these sexual athletes, primed for action when the ewes are. So we manage our ewes, we manage our rams. So now is the time, especially for buying in rams, there's a risk of introducing disease, all those sort of things. We'll talk about quarantine in a bit. So ewe nutrition, then we move on to the ram. I suppose the next thing we need to think about really after that is looking at what other factors. So abortion is one I suppose we can be planning now. So abortion causes a lot of issues. The main ones being toxoplasmosis, relation to the cat plays a role here. The cat will be an intermediate host and shed these oocysts, and 50 grams of feces can contain 10 million oocysts from a young infected cat, and that it only takes 200 oocysts to infect a ewe. So we need to manage feed stores, but I suppose when it comes to toxoplasmosis, there is a vaccine. It works really well, but it has to be given in advanced breeding and months in advance. The other abortion agent we see a lot of issues with, which tends to be more frustrating, is in zoonotic abortion, and these infected animals or infected ewes when they abort shed the bacteria through their vaginal discharges. So if we're fostering lambs onto these, for example, at lambing time, or and when an animal becomes infected with this chlamydia, it can stay dormant until it's pregnant again, or if it's lambs, they can actually carry it in until they become pregnant and they can abort. So it's a really frustrating one. There's also a vaccine for chlamydial abortion, works really well in flocks that are naive. When you have an outbreak, I still recommend vaccination, but we will have carriers in the flock that may still abort, so it can be a little bit frustrating. It's one area, again, if you look at some of the outside challenges and the reduction of antibiotics, we end up putting out a lot of antibiotics for lameness, and abortion at this time of year. It's something, if we focus on through vaccination, we can reduce. Definitely those two vaccines have a big impact on overall flock performance. And you talk to any farmer who's experienced chlamydia abortion, they'll tell you they wished they had vaccinated in advance. So understanding what's our barren rate, how many empty ewes have we? It should be under 2%. Is it any higher? What's the abortion target? About 2% as well. So we dig into abortion figures, and this is really, you could spend a long time in each of these, but these are the kind of looking at the areas that we need to focus on at breeding time for optimal performance. The next thing we look at is lameness, and this is an all year round challenge. Again, lame rams are a disaster. Lame rams can be infertile, and it takes 6 to 8 weeks again, by the time they recover from the lameness, to get back fertile again. So we don't want lameness in rams. We don't want lameness in our flock anyway, but lame ewes is going to impact on ovulation and fertility, and it's going to drive down, it's a welfare issue, it's going to drive down performance and production. So we just want to manage lameness. Pain limits performance, we've got to remember that. So in our flock, outside of breeding, is now a time to, if you have a lameness issue, pull in your flock, spread them out from a lame flock to a sound flock based on the principles of the 5-point plan, treating, culling, avoiding, quarantine and vaccinating. But with your lame flock, what is actually causing your lameness? Is it cod? Is it foot rot? Is it scald? Is it something else? And then treat them accordingly. Work with your veterinarian, looking at what treatments work best. Marking ewes, particularly with sheep, they're very poor to develop immunity to a lot of these infectious agents, so they become carriers and shedders of sources of infection. So that's really important. Then you can utilize foot batting in both flocks, your sound and your lame flock, until you get a resolution. So ultimately we want to pull this lame flock out, manage them for 3 to 4 weeks, and bring them back to a sound flock. Now the sound flock would need to go out to a pasture that hasn't had sheep on it for 14 days, because foot rot, for example, will last 14 days in the environment. And we want to keep foot batting that sound flock as well. So we're going at this very intensely. When it comes to foot batting, it's all about the time of the foot. The foot spends in the bat. Clean foot going into a foot bat for as long as possible, and then going on to a dry area after. So there's different agents you can use within the foot bat, but having sheep flowing through it. But ultimately the best foot bats are the ones where you can actually put sheep into them in batches, get them to stand in it, and you get more contact time as well. So, and then looking at probably vaccinating it's one of those vaccines in flocks. When farmers start using it, foot vax, they get a really good response from. So looking at vaccination as well, if it's infectious disease like particularly foot rot, it's designed for that. But even with cod, you see good benefit. So I I think it's something you build into your plan. Again, this is a whistle-stop tour. Lameness is an area you need to focus on. Instead of just treating, you need to maybe have a flock plan. I tell you, if you're breeding in over these period or another cycle, don't do any intervention at this stage. The time to be intervening is around now. Next thing we need to control, I suppose, in the risk assessment as we come into parasite risk. Do we need to worm ewes? Ideally in a system we shouldn't be worming our sheep, but we could by our body condition scoring exam here assess based on need. So if ewes are underweight, under target, are they the ones we want to look at for dung sampling, taking some fecal egg counts, pooled fecal egg counts to see what the risk is like. Fluke, there's no immunity develops to fluke, so that's very farm specific depending on what part of the country you're in. If you're out west or up north, it's a higher risk, and this year the early figures look like it's going to be a mild risk for fluke, but we don't know. I think we need to watch that evolve. So what fluke treatments are you using? And with both worms and fluke, we have the issue of resistance. So have we resistant worm populations in the flock? And have we triclobendazole, which is our Lameness, our Indofluke, have we resistance there? So we need to focus on that and draw up a parasite plan. And everyone would love this, the one-fits-all model, but every farm is slightly different, and you need to assess your risk. With really high-risk fluke farms and acute fluke, you've really got to chase a really good dosing protocol with your vet or advisor in your flock. I suppose the next thing I'd say, and probably alluded to it maybe out here, is 10 ewes. Ewes that are under condition. Why are they under condition? Is it nutrition? Is it their teeth? But is it some other disease like these iceberg diseases? So everybody's aware of the iceberg, the phenomenon that most of it's underwater. And a lot of these diseases, and there's the 5 main ones: border disease, CLA, midivizna, OPA, and Johne's disease. These diseases, we often get ewes or 10 and they're culled out of the herd. We don't know why, but we need to find out, are these diseases affecting our flocks? And if so, we need to look at how we control them. So 10 ewes are always, to me, the tip of the iceberg and need to be investigated. And certainly, if you're losing any ewes on farm with unusual clinical symptoms, like respiratory disease that you're not getting response from vaccination from, post-mortems are incredibly valuable. You can go in fluke risk farms and you can check livers. You can go in and look at the lungs from a midivizna point of view, an OPA point of view, the guts from a Johne's perspective, and you can look for abscessation. So they're very, very valuable when we're losing ewes as feeding back into the overall farm performance and asking the question, why are ewes 10? I think that's really key for me. Why are we seeing 10 ewes? Okay, so there's some of the main things I would have said that are going to be impacting performance. Body condition score, abortion, lameness, minerals, parasites. You know, get your vaccines right. If you are doing anything with hormone intervention, planning it out, be aware of those RAM ratios. And I suppose finally then, always being kind of having an eye on the risks for disease spread in the flock. And that's from buying in sheep is where they're more likely to get these diseases, particularly iceberg diseases, lameness, resistant worms. What's your quarantine plan? Are you tackling those resistant worm risk? Are you treating them accordingly? Are you looking at not introducing lameness, foot batting, and being aware of the risk of iceberg diseases? And then within farm, there's the whole biocontainment piece, even with lameness, you know, as we come up to topping time, and if it's wetter, high risk areas, high traffic areas, are we moving feeders, gaps and gates, should we be liming and putting stone down, just to, because sheep tend to follow paths and they follow the same pattern. Those, if we've got infectious lameness, they tend to be high risk areas for spread. So understanding all that. So that's kind of an overview of some of the key areas, I think, that really impact flock performance at this time of year. That's what I'd be looking at, and most people will check these off, good, and they'll identify some risks, and that's the way to work. It's progress over perfection with any animal health performance plan, I believe. Happy safe farming.